message does Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi's press conference convey to the world? It seems Beijing is gathering momentum for its diplomatic approach as the nation will celebrate its 70th anniversary since its founding in 1949. As we are navigating the once-in-a-century changes on the planet full of unprecedented uncertainties for humanity, how does the planet's second-largest economic power define its role? What is to be expected this year for Chinese diplomatic engagement? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Hua Liming, China's former ambassador to Iran, He Wenping, senior research fellow with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Anna Tangen, author and columnist. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to our discussion here. Ambassador Hua, how do you comment on the achievements of the Chinese Foreign Ministry over the year of 2018?
2018 was a very special year, and we have so many difficulties in the uncertainties and unpredictable events we had, and which has created a lot of problems and troubles for China. So Chinese diplomacy had to deal with all that difficulties. For instance, the election of Donald Trump as president of the United States, and he initiated the trade war between China and the United States. And the Sino-U.S. relationship has meeting major challenges in 2018. And the other problems that we have in Europe and other places. But 2018, I should say, also very successful of Chinese diplomacy.
The annual press conference hosted by Foreign Minister and State Councillor Wang Yi lasted for exactly 2 hours, and I was watching the live coverage of this major event on the sidelines of Lianghui, and I was impressed by one catchphrase that the Foreign Minister used often in addressing and fielding questions from the media. He used strategic patience and poise and composure to characterize the posture of China's foreign ministry, despite all the uncertainties and the unpredictable events that Ambassador Hua Liming spoke of. What do you think of the implications of such phrases?
Well, I also, watched not on the sideline of 2 sessions from TV, okay, the live TV coverage. I think my deep impression is, I think Foreign Minister Wang Yi shows a kind of self-confidence. Those self-confidence and also patience, like you mentioned, is not from himself. Of course, his personal personality also very unique. But from all those performances China has been undertaken during the past year, because in the past year, as Ambassador Hua just mentioned, a lot of uncertainty, in the world. This world has been gone through a big change, and all those world set up. All that is changing. So being the second biggest economy and also like the biggest, the developing country. So for China, we have been carrying on very heavy those burdens on our shoulders. So we have to, first of all, what kind of flag we will, holding on, lead forward. So it's an inclusive globalization, or we also say no longer needs this globalization. We just follow like a United States way, put China first. All right, China first is nice, even when you call this slogan to the people at home, put our own interests at the core. But actually, it's not that way. We still need to take the responsibility, for bringing those wealth like prosperity, even China's experience for development for other countries. Yeah, the wish to share with those experiences. So that's why this One Belt, One Road issue, I think Foreign Minister Wang Yi has addressed this to quite I think for many minutes for that, because next month we will have the second Belt Road Initiative. Also, he has addressed like how China developed our relation.
You mean the second BRI summit?
Yes, second BRI summit. So all in all, shows we have this self-confidence for those road we are choosing. Yeah, even though some Chinese coming from Beijing, from domestic.
And there is no question about the loyalty and the capability of the Chinese Foreign Ministry diplomats in particular. However, recently some events did alert a skeptical West to the issue of so-called assertiveness of the Chinese diplomats. Bloomberg wrote an article accusing the Chinese diplomats of being so tough, bellicose. Now, I was surprised. So what kind of attitude does the whole of the West have towards the style and substance of the Chinese diplomacy in recent years, particularly after President Trump took office?
Well, there's been a marked change in diplomacy, and I don't want to step on the ambassador's toes here. But the events that happened in Sweden and also in Canada, where the ambassadors took a very forward tone about incidents that had happened there. One was Wang, another one involved some tourists. This is not usual. This is a very strong departure from the past. So they were used, these two incidents, I shouldn't say small because the Meng thing is not, to in essence say, oh, China is embarked on a very, very heavy-handed way. And they're also this idea of debt trap diplomacy. So this has been creating a narrative in the international press that somehow China has become very bellicose and everything that you said. But the truth is, what has happened in 2018 and what impresses me most, and I agree with both of you, is that the U.S. has withdrawn. If you start looking at their statements at APEC and what happened there, Donald Trump, Pence, waiting for applause, 6 seconds go by and there's silence. All right, the G20, also disaster. You can just point to meeting after meeting, whether it was in Europe and Donald Trump not willing to go to the cemeteries of the fallen soldiers because it was an hour and a half away in the rain. There has just been one after another of very, very bad openings by the United States. And this has put China in the position where it's trying to be very measured, but it's being pulled into this vacuum because people are saying, well, what are you going to do about it, you being China? And this is, China has to be very, very careful. You cannot just run in there and save everybody. It's not possible.
In fact, Foreign Minister and State Councilor Wang used the case of Afghanistan to describe what would happen to the Chinese leadership regionally. I mean, on our doorsteps, following the military drawdown in this war-torn, landlocked country. Ambassador Hua, you've been a senior diplomat, ambassador to some important countries. Current tensions between the two major economies always capture headlines, but diplomacy is designed to fix problems through a constructive diplomatic solution. Yes. And therefore the style of the diplomats would be very, very important.
Yes, as a retired diplomat, I joined Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1960s, the years of the Cold War. And when we joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we were told that the main job of the diplomat was struggle against imperialism and revisionism. That was our major job.
That was during the Cold War.
Yes, but after 1978, after the reforms and the opening door, we are asked to make friends all over the world. China should be the equal partner of all countries of the world. Like China should be the friend of the whole world. So our major job is to make friends. So I think that to today, this is still the Chinese job. The assertiveness, I don't think these are the major characteristics of Chinese diplomats. So it's very, as a diplomat, I know it's very easy to break down the negotiations, break down a peaceful talk. It just say very tough things.
Like President Trump walking away from Hanoi.
Yes,
protest.
Yes, but it's a very easy job.
Yeah, let's go back to what happened in 1955 when late Premier Zhou Enlai attended the Bandung Conference, which put forward the idea of a peaceful coexistence, or 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. In fact, he was caught unprepared by the hostile atmosphere that enveloped the whole Jaffe Hui Asia-Africa Conference in Bandung, Indonesia. So he put aside the prepared transcript and wrote or drafted a speech which achieved a huge success the next day. He wanted to make a friend, despite the hostility that was very much cultivated by the hostile nation of the United States after the Korean War. So what kind of inspirations could we learn from the style of Zhou Enlai's diplomacy?
Well, I think the golden thing the Premier Zhou Enlai told us is, that is, when you are facing those things, unpredicted, and then you have to use your own wisdom to deal with them. If the things changed and then you're still using those prepared something to deal with the new things, of course it's not workable. And another thing is put aside those disputes and then trying to find some common points with those developing countries. So when we go back to the situation in 1955, by that time, those newly independent, those third world countries, we are calling them third world countries, they have not fully understand what is the system called a socialist system. So they don't understand, and then they have some misunderstanding from those Western media. So by that time, so for the Premier Zhou Enlai, he said we don't need to talk about too much about those different systems. We just talk about those things, what we are fighting for. Yeah, we are fighting for economic independence, because for all other countries, they have been colonized, yeah, with those Western, those colonialism. So this is the common wishes and the common goals. So we focus on the common things and then put aside those disputes or
Anna, do we have anything to share with the United States? Do we have any commonality to share with the United States? Because 求同存异 means we seek a common ground while brush aside the differences. It seems we have been locked up in animosity. We have so many disputes. Look at things that cause the tensions between the two biggest economies.
And this is where Zhou Enlai would have been very valuable today, because he can see past a lot of the rhetoric. What you have is the United States struggling to reassert supremacy over the world. But the world has changed. Every year that goes by, the United States GDP in real terms globally is going down. And this is the kind of last gasp to try to gather the world around it. And Donald Trump's strategy is he wants to knock down China, and then he's made it clear, he's already said India, Turkey, the EU, Canada, Mexico, they've all been in line, Japan and South Korea, although South Korea has actually signed an agreement. But the fact is, he's trying to remake the world, and this is the difficulty. It's not about China and what China is trying to do. It's really about this whole idea that Trump has of reasserting America by this kind of slogan, America first. You can't really do that. If everyone is saying me first, everything breaks down. If you have a society where every individual says, I'm only going to vote selfishly for myself, then you have the breakdown of democracy. You know, if the U.S. really believes in democracy, which many of us do, that means that you try to coexist, that there are moral levels that you don't violate, that you're willing to invest in the future. And this is not something Donald Trump talks about.
This morning when I was looking at the live coverage, I was a little bit surprised that Chinese and Asian reporters account for at least 85% of the big crowd. Besides, the spokesperson of Liang Hui only selected a few questions from the West. One of the questions was about delinking Chinese economy. Are you surprised, Anna, that Foreign Minister Wang said to decouple from the Chinese economy means to decouple from opportunities, to decouple from future, and to decouple from the world?
No, I'm not surprised. I mean, quite frankly, you know, what he's talking about is the power of markets. Right now you have the developed countries who are virtually in a standstill economically. Japan isn't moving the needle. The U.S. is got to 2.9, but after a massive tax cut, and it's already forecasted that that will wear off next year and even go down further the following year. Whereas China, India, the developing worlds, the emerging worlds continue to do much better than the developed. So if you're the developed world and you say, no, I don't need you, all right, you're absolutely wrong. The United States still exports almost $2 trillion worth of goods. If that disappears from the economy, you're going to see widespread layoffs because there's a multiplier effect in a reverse way in which that happens. And this seems to be something Donald doesn't look at.
And one of the China hands in the United States, Susan Shirk, said recently in an interview that the efforts by the Trump administration to raise tariffs would get nowhere. You're watching Dialogue with Ambassador Hua Liming, Madam He Wenping, and Anna Tangen. We're discussing the press conference, the annual one hosted by State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi on the sidelines of Lianghui, the two sessions. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us, please. Welcome back to our special edition of Dialogue, Voices and the Votes. Ambassador Hua, the very first question that was raised, other than the review of China's diplomacy in the year 2018, was about the Korean Peninsula. And in fact, two questions were picked from the media about the Korean Peninsula, the process of denuclearization. How important is it for China? It seems the DPRK really wanted to talk to the United States on a one-on-one basis, and some observers, Chinese and foreign alike, say perhaps China will be left marginalized somehow. But then Foreign Minister and State Councilor Wang Yi said China's influence and the role it played in brokering the peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula would not be easy to be replaced. What did he mean?
One point that really I appreciate President Donald Trump is that he is the first U.S. president who met DPRK leader twice. Once in Singapore, the second is Hanoi.
Is that because of the glow of the Nobel Peace Prize? The lethal attraction?
He was. But of course, it's quite ridiculous for him to have the Nobel Prize. But the Hanoi talks, I think still it's Donald Trump has kept his position as a president who seeks peaceful settlement of the Korean Peninsula. He is the first U.S. president, and despite all the setbacks in Hanoi, we noticed that both sides, the DPRK and the United States, they haven't left the negotiation table. They are still remain on the table. Neither of the side wants war with each other. So this is, I think, the main story we have in Hanoi.
A correspondent from Yonhap news agency of ROK asked questions about, and this question was reinforced by a second one on the Korean Peninsula. Why did Chairman Kim Jong-un come over 4 times in less than 1 year to meet with his Chinese counterpart, Mr. Xi Jinping? Now, we all know the open secret about what happened during the Korean War between the two countries, the DPRK and China. Some kind of mistrust happened for many reasons. And China firmly supports nuclear disarmament to the dismay of the DPRK. And we also supported the UN-led economic sanctions as a result of the nuclear and missile tests conducted by Pyongyang. Given all of these things, and if you put those things into one perspective, it would come as a surprise for all observers that this young leader of the DPRK could come 4 times. What does that mean?
Yeah, this exactly means that China's role is not marginalized at all. Actually has played a quite fundamental role for bringing those two sides, I mean, DPRK and the United States, the two leaders to meet, no matter it's in Singapore or Hanoi. So I think this kind of, this talk, very good momentum now happening in the Korean Peninsula shows like not only the U.S. and DPRK relations getting better than before, even the DPRK relation with China also getting better than before. And also, not to mention the South and the North, the two Korean countries. So this is a good direction. Anyhow, I think China has joined with U.S. and we have also signed the UN resolution. Put pressure on DPRK. So has this kind of joint effort pushed the things to a same and right direction.
Are you
so that
suggesting
makes things
China
happen.
is part of the maximum pressure imposed by President Trump?
Yeah, we are part of the solution.
Part of the solution, not
part
part of
the
the maximum pressure or fire and fury?
And we are also offered like very, I think, practical those ideas. For example, double suspension. Yeah, for the the Korea and the United States, suspension for those military drill, and for the DPRK, suspension for those missile tests, nuclear tests. This thing has been generated results. We have seen that.
But
so
the problem is that there's you're talking the diplomatic process depends on predictability and trust.
Yeah.
I'm not going to make agreement with you if I know you're not going to follow through. And this is always the basic difficulty of Donald Trump in his business life. And so far in his political life, he'll toss aside whatever it was signed by somebody before, and there's a real question of whether he would do that again.
As an overseas observer who follows the process in the Korean Peninsula, which is more important regarding the Chinese influence? When Chairman Kim Jong-un says he would put aside the principle of military first and concentrate on economic reconstruction, do you think China would first of all provide the security assurance that's the precondition for economic reform and opening up? Or do you think we would inspire Chairman Kim Jong-un with the Chinese role of development and the mode of development to open up, like what happened 40 years ago?
Okay.
By normalizing ties
we've
with the
talked
United
about
States?
this many times, and I've told you that in the end, what's going to happen, if you cannot trust Donald Trump, you need somebody you do trust to assure safety. And that really comes down to only two powers, China or Russia. And he's not going to ask South Korea to guarantee his safety, because that is, their military is literally run by the U.S., and of course Japan would not be appropriate. So at this point, the only creative way of doing this is to have a third party who has the trust of all parties to come in there, guarantee it, and then start this process where you can start de-escalating the nukes on one side and the economic tariffs on the other.
Well, at the beginning of 2019, President Xi Jinping would choose Europe as the first destination of his diplomatic mission. That, of course, generates some discussions and speculations as to the agenda of the Chinese Foreign Ministry in this year, 2019. Instead of visiting President Trump in Mar-a-Lago to apply the finishing touches to the marathon negotiations of the trade talk, or Japan, or a country in the neighborhood in Asia, instead Europe comes across as a first on the agenda. What do you make of this implication?
You see, Europe actually is at the end of the Belt and Road, either in ancient time and in modern time. From the west of China through Central Asia, Middle East to Europe. So Europe, the Rome and the Europe has been so important for Belt and Road, and it's so significant for China. So that made Chinese leadership very taking big significance to the Europe. At this time, I think Italy is the first stop of President Xi Jinping, and that will be very important for China.
China will play host to yet another multilateral summit meeting, the BRI summit. How important is this kind of diplomatic event for China to let the world know that we want to usher in a new era of constructing community of shared future, co-prosperity, so on and so forth, and to dismiss speculations on a kind of a conspiracy theory? China wants to rebuild the world order. So many overseas reports try to figure out what China really wants.
Yeah, I think this One Belt One Road has been there already for 5 years, ever since 2013. So during the past 5 years, actually a lot of projects has been undertaken, like in Africa, Central Asian country, and even South Asia. So even recently, the Saudi crown visited China, and also before visiting China, he visited Pakistan, and also promised to invest it as many as like $10 billion US to build a refinery in Qatar port. So this this is the third party to join One Belt, One Road, join this China-Pakistan corridor building. So which means what? Which means now even the richest country in the Middle East now want to join this One Belt, One Road building. So I think this is the chief achievements we have been made during the past 5 years. Let world know what kind of thing China exactly want to do. Yeah, China, of course, is not saying, oh, we give money to all those countries. If you join it, just take our check away. It's not that thing. It's like a co-constructing, co-consultation, and a win-win, both win, and even triple win. So I think this is the platform. This coming Apple, this second one, as our Foreign Minister Wang Yi said, this time around, certainly the country, especially the heads of the state and the heads of government, come to join this meeting will be certainly much, much more than the first time, because now the people understand it.
Well, one of the things, I agree with everything you said, but I mean, the trip of Xi going to Europe at this time is very strategic. Quite frankly, Europe has signaled, both with their reluctance to follow the U.S. on the Huawei deal,
and the European Union is supportive of multilateralism.
And the climate accord, and also the Iranian deal. I mean, what you see is increasingly a much larger divide between two traditional allies, Europe and the United States. And China is not trying to take advantage of this, but they are certainly aware of it. And this is a strong signal, especially to the EU with Brexit around the corner, that they want to engage Europe in some sort of constructive way. They have a lot more in common when it comes to diplomacy than the EU has with the US. The EU is waiting for the next shoe to drop, which is when Donald Trump comes after them. The time is ticking on the time period when the negotiations finish, and if it's not satisfactory, I think we all know what Donald Trump will do.
Ambassador Hua, let me go back to one of the points Wenping spoke of, the official visit by Crown Prince Salman of Saudi Arabia, and he is very supportive of China's crackdown on religious extremism in this country. Everyone understands what happened in Turkey following reports on Xinjiang. How important is the position of the Saudi government on this particular sensitive issue?
Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, during his visit to China, he was very silent about China's situation in Xinjiang and China's policy. The reason is that not only the reservation of Chinese position, because China has provided to the world the experience of the fighting against terrorism. This is a very new way, new style of the struggle against the terrorism. And the Chinese government has created a very new style to fight against the terrorism. I think Saudi Arabia could agree with many of Chinese policy because they have the problem of terrorism. Unfortunately, in Turkey, the leaders in Turkey, they think the other way. So we had diplomatic troubles with Turkish government, but in Saudi Arabia and most Arab countries and Middle East countries, they have been very cooperative, and they they can agree with Chinese policy in Xinjiang.
With that, we come to the end of this special edition of Dialogue, Voices and Votes on the Sidelines of Liang Hui. See you next time.